She washed the dishes and sang to the glass, unaware that the millionaire was mesmerized by her, completely unaware that her soft humming had already begun changing a life that had long forgotten what warmth felt like, and it all began on the quiet Tuesday morning she stepped into the huge mansion that looked more like a museum than a home. Amelia had taken the cleaning job out of necessity, not desire. The bills were piling up, her mother's medicine kept getting more expensive, and opportunities in the small town were scarce, so when the agency called her for a temporary housekeeping shift at the mansion of the reclusive millionaire Adrian Hale, she accepted instantly, though she had no idea she was walking straight into a destiny that would shift both of their worlds. Adrian Hale, a man known not for public charm but for his distant demeanor and breathtaking business empire, had built a life around silence, polished floors, empty halls, and a loneliness so deeply planted in his chest that even he had grown numb to it. So when Amelia walked in, the delicate sound of her voice, soft, warm, untrained, was like a foreign language the house had never heard before. She didn't intend to sing, not really. She only murmured her favorite old tune when she worked, because it kept her calm, kept her anchored, kept her heart from falling apart under the weight of her responsibilities. So that morning, as she rolled up her sleeves and began washing the breakfast dishes left by another housekeeper, she let her voice drift into the sunlight streaming through the huge kitchen window. She didn't know the acoustics of the mansion carried sound like a cathedral. She didn't know Adrian had returned early from a tense meeting. She didn't know he had paused in the hallway, confused at first by the softness of the melody, and then completely arrested by the sight of the woman in his kitchen, sleeves wet, apron fitted around her waist, her face lit with an effortless joy he couldn't remember the last time he had seen in anyone, let alone inside his own cold home. She was humming to a glass, literally, holding it up to the sunlight as if the water droplets on it were diamonds, laughing quietly when a sparkling mist splashed from her hand. Adrian stood frozen, one hand on the doorway, watching her with an expression even he didn't recognize, because it wasn't attraction alone, it was wonder, a kind of disbelieving awe that someone could look so alive in a place he had let become emotionally dead. Amelia continued working, singing, unaware of the gaze fixed on her, unaware that every note she released felt like it pushed open a window inside the men who had forgotten how to breathe without stress. Adrian had been surrounded by people all his life, employees, investors, the media, but never presence, never warmth, never anything like this. The longer he stood there, the more he felt something pulling him forward, something that whispered that this stranger with wet hands and a bright smile was a reminder of life beyond contracts and expectations. He finally stepped into the kitchen, clearing his throat softly so he wouldn't startle her, but she still jumped a little, spinning around, her cheeks going pink the instant she saw him. "Sir, I'm so sorry, I didn't know you were home early," she stuttered, reaching quickly to turn off the faucet. "I shouldn't have been singing," but Adrian lifted his hand lightly, stopping her apology mid-sentence. "It's fine," he said, his voice gentler than he intended, almost surprising himself. "Please, continue. It's nice." No one had ever heard Adrian Hale compliment anything emotional, let alone a song. Amelia blinked, unsure if he was being polite or serious, but his eyes didn't have the distant glaze she had expected from a billionaire. Instead, they carried something almost soft. "I just sing to keep myself focused," she admitted, suddenly shy. "I didn't think anyone would hear." Adrian stepped closer, leaning lightly against the counter to ease the tension she didn't know she was giving off. "This house could use a little noise," he said quietly, and Amelia smiled, a small, genuine smile that warmed the cold edges of the marble room, and without realizing it, Adrian smiled too, something his staff hadn't seen in months. As she turned back to the dishes, she tried not to feel nervous, but his presence was like static in the air, charged yet strangely comforting. He watched her again, not in a way that made her feel objectified, but with an attentiveness that made her wonder how lonely a man must be to look at something as ordinary as dishwashing as if it were a miracle. "How long have you been with the agency?" he asked, and Amelia answered honestly, not hiding her struggles, because there was something about him that didn't feel judgmental. She told him about her mother, about the long hours she worked, about the dreams she once had of going to music school before life became too heavy. Adrian listened, really listened, for the first time in years. And as she spoke, he realized how foreign sincerity felt to him. He had spent years surrounded by fake laughter, polished deals, and compliments used as weapons. Amelia's simple honesty was disarming. He found himself wanting to hear more. Wanting to know what made her smile like the sun was inside her chest. wanting to know why she could find joy in something as simple as singing to a glass. The moment stretched, warm and strangely intimate, until Amelia finished the dishes and wiped her hands on her apron, suddenly aware that she had been talking too much. "I should get back to work," she said quickly, stepping aside. "I talk too much when I'm nervous." Adrian shook his head immediately. "No. You talk just enough," he replied, and the sincerity in his tone made her feel seen, deeply seen, without being exposed. She nodded gratefully and moved on to wiping the counters, humming again without noticing, and Adrian lingered, pretending to look for something in the cabinets just so he could stay in the same room a little longer. With every note she sang, his heart seemed to loosen, something long frozen melting slowly. He had no idea how to name the feeling, but he knew that when she left that afternoon, the kitchen felt painfully quiet, and he found himself standing exactly where she had stood, his fingers brushing the edge of the sink she had touched, wondering how someone could bring life into a place with nothing more than a melody. Over the next days, he found excuses, small, harmless excuses, to be home more often during her shifts. A forgotten document. A sudden break in his meetings. A coffee he claimed to want to make for himself but always abandoned just to listen to her humming drift through the hallways. Amelia, unaware of the effect she had, simply worked with her natural spirit, cleaning with soft humming, laughing at little things, finding beauty in the mundane, and every day, Adrian found himself drawn more deeply into the orbit of a woman who didn't even know she was changing him. Until one day, when she reached for a glass from the top shelf and lost her grip, letting out a gasp as it slipped, but Adrian was there, closer than she realized, catching it before it hit the ground. Their hands brushed, and the contact was electric, brief but powerful. Amelia froze. Adrian did too. Their eyes met, and for the first time, she saw not the billionaire, not the powerful figure from newspapers, but a man who looked unexpectedly human, unexpectedly vulnerable. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, breath catching. "Thank you. I didn't even hear you come in." "I've gotten good at listening," he replied, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Especially when you're singing." Her face warmed, every part of her suddenly too aware of his closeness. She laughed nervously. "You must think I'm strange." "No," he said immediately, shaking his head. "I think you're a reminder." "Of what?" she whispered before she could stop herself. "Of what life looks like when someone is actually living it." Her heart skipped, not because of the words themselves, but because of how honestly he said them. She didn't know what to say. He didn't know what else to say. The room filled with a silence that felt fragile, tender, charged. And then she smiled, small, shy, but real, and the sight of it was enough to make him feel something in his chest he hadn't felt since boyhood. Something like hope. And though she didn't know it yet, though he didn't dare admit it yet, the millionaire who had built a fortress around his heart had just surrendered to a maid who washed dishes and sang to a glass without knowing she had become the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. And if you want to hear what fate had planned next for them, how a song turned into a connection, how a connection turned into something deeper, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because the next chapter will take you exactly where their hearts are headed.